Ju-won is a man who has never experienced a woman's touch in his entire life. The only source of comfort he ever had were his parents, who tragically lost their lives in a car accident on Christmas Eve. Since then, every Christmas has become a lonely routine for him, wandering the streets aimlessly while everyone else enjoys the holiday with their wives and children. Seeing all those happy families only makes him feel more isolated, and because of his tall stature, people tend to avoid him, leaving him with no one to talk to. While wandering around as usual, Ju-won notices an old man dressed in a Santa costume begging by the roadside. Feeling sorry for the old fellow, he decides to give him some money rather than waste it on beer and junk food. Grateful for the kindness, the old man asks Ju-won whether he has any wishes in life. Ju-won immediately finds the old man somewhat creepy and tries to leave, but the persistent Santa refuses to let him go. Left with no choice, Ju-won casually lies and says that he wishes to win the lottery. However, the old man sees right through him and insists that he reveal the desire buried deep inside his heart. Those words strike a chord with Ju-won, making him emotional. After thinking about it, he realizes that all he truly wants is a happy family, a beautiful wife, and an adorable daughter. The old man confidently promises that his wish will come true, and if he fails, he will stop calling himself Santa. Thinking the man is just some overenthusiastic Santa fanatic, Ju-won leaves him behind and returns to his old, cramped apartment. That night, he boards a late-night train, only to find himself surrounded by couples. Not wanting to watch them any longer, he closes his eyes and falls asleep. Little does he know that it will be the final time he sleeps on Earth. When he opens his eyes again, he finds himself inside a cage mounted on a carriage, surrounded by several strangers. Everyone around him looks miserable and half-starved, as though they have not eaten in days. Compared to them, Ju-won seems to be in slightly better shape, but he quickly notices that he is not wearing any clothes and begins to shiver from the cold. Looking around, he hears the soldiers driving the carriage, speaking a language he cannot understand. He soon notices that every person inside the cage is restrained with heavy shackles, making it obvious that they are part of a slave caravan. It is only then that Ju-won realizes that the creepy Santa somehow sent him to another world, even stealing Truck Kun's usual job. Before he can fully process the situation, the freezing cold starts getting to him. While searching for a way to survive, his eyes land on the corpse of a slave who still has clothes on. Although he feels guilty about taking garments from the dead, he knows he has no other option if he wants to avoid freezing to death. After putting on the clothes, Ju-won sits down and begins thinking about that strange Santa. He wonders whether becoming a slave was somehow supposed to fulfill his dream of having a loving family, or if that old man simply wanted to prank him. Deep down, he still hopes that all of this is just a dream and that he will wake up in his room and enjoy a nice, warm bath. Several days pass like this, and Ju-won gradually adapts to life among the slaves. His cheeks have become sunken, and his once decent appearance now looks completely disheveled. Starving and exhausted, he desperately wishes for this nightmare to end. Eventually, the caravan stops at a village, and the soldiers line up the slaves to be sold to the locals. For the first time in a while, Ju-won sees a ray of hope. Even if becoming a slave is terrible, he knows that at least he will be fed once a day according to the rules. Confident in his appearance and tall physique, he even believes that the wealthiest person in the village will purchase him. Unfortunately, reality proves far crueler than he imagined. Not a single person even glances in his direction. The same thing continues throughout the journey. Every time the caravan reaches a village, the slaves are sold one after another while Ju-won is always left behind. Gradually, he loses all hope and starts giving up on life itself. Filled with resentment, he curses the creepy Santa for lying to him about granting him a life of happiness and instead throwing him into this hellhole. Unable to endure the misery any longer, Ju-won decides to end everything by driving a nearby fork into his neck. Just as he is about to do it, an angel suddenly appears before him and extends a helping hand. Ju-won freezes in place, completely captivated by the breathtaking beauty of the woman standing before him. In her hand is a piece of bread that looks more appetizing than anything he has ever eaten, even at a 5-star restaurant. The woman says something to him, but Ju-won cannot understand a single word, not because he is incapable of learning their language, but because his mind is completely occupied by the beauty of the woman and the sight of the adorable little daughter standing beside her. Previously, inside a shabby and worn-down room, the beautiful woman Lizzie was having dinner with her daughter. Since the meal portions were quite small, Lizzie worried that her daughter would not have enough to eat, so she gave the child her own share as well. The little girl was delighted, but she did not want her mother to stay hungry. She split the food into 2 portions, keeping one half for herself and handing the other half back to Lizzie. Just as Lizzie was about to thank her, loud knocking suddenly echoed from the door. The village chief instructed her not to open the door completely and to simply listen to what he had to say. He informed her that a group of slaves had been brought by the soldiers and that one of them would be purchased to become her husband. He told her to prepare herself because she would soon be moving back to the mountain with him. Before leaving, he also reminded her to prepare some food for the soldiers, as they would be arriving at daybreak. The news left Lizzie stunned because her previous marriage had been nothing short of a nightmare. Every day, she had suffered beatings and endured endless misery. She had no desire to relive that painful chapter of her life and briefly considered running away. However, her thoughts soon turned to the young girl, the daughter her former husband had left behind from an earlier marriage. Lizzie had only come to know the child some time ago, and she could not bring herself to abandon her. The young girl seemed to sense her mother's distress. Wrapping her tiny arms around Lizzie, she tried her best to comfort her. Seeing this gesture eased Lizzie's sorrow, and she eventually calmed down before putting the girl to bed. The child did not even have a name yet. That was why Lizzie feared that if she married again, both of them might end up trapped in another nightmare. That nightmare had begun many years earlier, when Lizzie's father sold her for nothing more than a rabbit skin. A man living on the village mountain bought her, and before she even had the chance to unpack her belongings, he arrived and started beating her for being late. Life only grew worse after that. Day after day, she suffered abuse and torture. Her arms and legs might have been broken long ago, if not for the young girl, who appeared in her life like a ray of light, becoming an angel within her living hell. One day, after brutally beating Lizzie again, the man headed into the forest to hunt animals and never came back. Later, the village chief informed her that he had been killed by a wild beast and that his body was never recovered. Lizzie was overjoyed when she heard the news, but her happiness quickly faded when reality set in. During those backward times, a woman without a husband was viewed as useless and incapable of surviving on her own. Because of this, Lizzie chose to face her fears instead of running away, as she could not leave her daughter behind. The next morning, Lizzie prepared herself and even baked several pieces of bread, carrying the food with her. She made her way outside toward the parked carriages. There, she noticed a man attempting to unalive himself by pressing a fork against his neck. The sight instantly reminded her of her own painful past and the time she had once considered using a fork to end her own life. In the end, she had never gone through with it. Without hesitation, Lizzie rushed over and stopped the man from unaliving himself. Looking closer, she saw his hollow cheeks and messy appearance and offered him a piece of bread. Before she could say anything further, the village chief arrived and instructed her to return to her hut, assuring her that he would take care of purchasing the slaves. Lizzie and the young girl gave the man one final glance before leaving. That man was none other than Ju-won. He could hardly believe that someone had offered him bread at the very moment he had been prepared to unalive himself. Instantly, everything else vanished from his mind as his attention became completely fixed on the food. Unfortunately, before he could take even a single bite, the soldiers dragged him out of the cell and brought him before the village chief. Ju-won and two other slaves knelt on the ground while soldiers stood around them. Moments later, one soldier pulled out a knife and sliced their arms, drawing blood. He smeared the blood onto 2 sheets of paper, and to Ju-won's surprise, the papers immediately emitted a faint blue glow. The sight left him astonished. He wondered whether this was some kind of magic. It also made him increasingly curious about this strange world, where slavery still existed and magic seemed to be real. Once the contracts were completed, a soldier leaned over and whispered something into the village chief's ear. The chief nodded before approaching Ju-won to examine his condition. At the same time, Lizzie and her daughter returned to their hut. A village woman soon arrived with enough supplies to last them several days. She informed Lizzie that her future husband did not understand their language, so communicating with him would likely be difficult at first. Noticing Lizzie's lingering fear, the woman tried to reassure her. She explained that although the man appeared to be a commoner, his hands were unusually soft, more like those of a noble than a laborer. She also reminded Lizzie that nobody in the village had liked her former husband, and that they had only tolerated him because he served as the mountain keeper. The woman added that if her new husband could perform the same work, they might be able to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Lizzie quietly replied that she did not care whether her husband was skilled or successful. Her only wish was that he would not be a violent man. Just then, the village chief pushed open the door and led Lizzie's new husband into the hut. To her surprise, it was the same man she had stopped from unaliving himself earlier that day. Seeing him from up close, she finally realized how tall and imposing he was, which made her somewhat nervous. Ju-won recognized her as the woman who had given him bread, but he could not understand why she appeared so frightened. Before he could make sense of the situation, the village chief grabbed his arm and placed him beside Lizzie and her daughter. Then he firmly linked their arms together, making them look like an awkward newly married family. Although Ju-won could not understand a single word being spoken, the atmosphere and the situation made it obvious enough. He realized that he was being married off to the woman. The scene reminded him of the creepy Santa. At that moment, he understood that Santa had not been lying when he promised him a cute rabbit-like wife and an adorable mongoose daughter. Ju-won could not help but feel happy, believing that he was finally living the dream he had always wanted. However, he still can't help feeling furious at that creepy Santa for putting him through so much trouble. Ju-won silently vows that if he ever runs into that Santa again, he'll make sure the old man suffers even more than he did. The furious look on Ju-won's face frightens both Lizzie and the young girl, who are still traumatized from everything they went through earlier. Meanwhile, the village chief is pleased to see Ju-won looking so energetic. Since being a mountain keeper is an exhausting job that only a strong person can handle, he decides to test whether Ju-won is truly qualified for the role. He signals one of the villagers to step forward and challenge Ju-won to a handshake. Although Ju-won can't understand a single word they're saying, he can easily sense what they want. Without holding back, he grips the villager's hand with all his strength. The man immediately regrets challenging him as Ju-won nearly crushes his hand, despite looking completely effortless while doing it. Satisfied with the result, the village chief moves on to the next test, hunting. He hands Ju-won a bow and gestures for him to shoot a wild rabbit. Having never touched a bow before, Ju-won only knows archery from watching Olympic competitions. He imitates the posture as best he can before releasing the arrow. Although the shot narrowly misses the rabbit, the village chief still seems impressed and applauds his attempt. Ju-won remains completely confused about what's happening until Lizzie and the young girl approach him carrying a basket. Looking at Lizzie up close, he can't help thinking she's incredibly beautiful. The realization that she is now his bride causes him to blush. Seeing his reaction, the village chief quickly concludes that Ju-won has probably never been around women before. Smiling to himself, he decides to leave the three of them alone so the newly formed family can begin getting comfortable with one another. Now that everyone else has left, Lizzie becomes even more nervous. She has no idea how to interact with her new husband, but she still knows she must fulfill her responsibilities as a wife. She carefully spreads a cloth across the ground before taking the food out of the basket. She serves a meal to Ju-won, gives a portion to the little girl, and finally prepares one for herself. The atmosphere is painfully awkward as they quietly eat together. Ju-won has no idea how to ease the tension. Since he doesn't understand their language, he can't even introduce himself. Once again, he finds himself silently cursing that creepy Santa for throwing him into such a random place. Even so, deep down he feels grateful. Without Santa's interference, he never would have had a family like this. After everyone finishes eating, the village chief returns to guide them to the mountain cabin where they will be living. The journey up the mountain is long, steep, and exhausting, making it especially difficult for the malnourished mother and daughter. Ju-won quickly notices how much they're struggling. Since he's now the man of the household, he naturally wants to help. He walks over to Lizzie, who immediately tenses up, unsure of what he's about to do. Ju-won has always been a gentleman and would never touch a woman without permission. Unfortunately, he has no way to explain himself because of the language barrier, and there isn't enough time to gesture either, so he simply lifts both Lizzie and the little girl into his arms and continues climbing toward the mountaintop. As he carries them, he realizes just how light they are. It becomes painfully obvious that both of them have been severely underfed. That thought strengthens his determination. He becomes even more eager to learn their language so he can communicate with them properly and make sure they can eat enough food to grow healthy and strong. Although Lizzie has no idea what is going through his mind, she can clearly see the determination in his expression. Her fear gradually melts away, and before long she even begins wiping the sweat from his forehead. Eventually, they reach the mountaintop. Ju-won gratefully thanks the village chief for leading them there. After the chief leaves, Ju-won turns toward the cabin that will now become his home. The run-down building is in terrible shape, and seeing its condition makes him shiver as he realizes he'll probably have to spend another freezing night. Still grumbling about the cold, he steps inside the cabin, only to find Lizzie standing there with tears filling her eyes. He wants to ask what happened, but before he can react, Lizzie rushes past him, leaving him alone inside. After running for a while, Lizzie stops beside a nearby lake. There, the reason for her despair becomes clear. While they were gone, someone had broken into the cabin and stolen everything they owned. The crockery, the table, the bow, the hammer, the knife, and even their farming hoe had all disappeared. With nothing left, she can't even repair the damaged cabin. That means they'll have to sleep in the freezing cold, without any protection from the wild animals that roam the mountain. As Lizzie sits there overwhelmed by hopelessness, Ju-won finally catches up to her. Relieved to have found her, he notices the tears running down her face. He quietly sits beside her and gently places his hand on top of her head in an attempt to comfort her. Even though Lizzie can't understand his words, she instinctively knows he is trying to reassure her. His kindness brings her some comfort, yet she still can't stop worrying about how they'll survive in such a cruel environment. Their cabin is falling apart, and her new husband doesn't seem like someone who has ever done hard manual work. Fortunately, repairing the cabin is something she believes she can handle herself. The real issue is food. To survive, they must hunt, yet Ju-won doesn't appear to have any experience using weapons. Even though her mind is filled with endless worries, her heart feels strangely calm whenever she's with him. Simply seeing Ju-won gives her a sense of relief, and somehow she believes he'll find a way to make everything better. Those emotions become too much for Lizzie to hold back, and tears once again begin streaming down her cheeks. Ju-won lets her cry for a while as he gently tells her that, back in his original original world, he lost his parents when he was still very young. Even though life seemed completely hopeless, he somehow found the strength to keep moving forward. Looking back now, he's thankful that he never gave up because, if he had, he would have never met her. That is why he wants to make sure that both she and her daughter are protected and well cared for the rest of their lives. Lizzie can't understand the words he is saying, but she can clearly feel the sincerity in his voice. For the first time in a long while, she completely lets down her guard. She wraps her arms around Ju-won and releases all the pain and emotions she has been holding inside for so long. However, when the little girl sees her mother crying, she immediately assumes that Ju-won has hurt her, just like her previous father used to. Determined to protect Lizzie, she rushes over and tries to pull her away from him. Instead, Ju-won gently pulls the little girl into the embrace as well. Ju-won still has no idea who the girl's real father is or what made Lizzie offer him food in the first place. But there is one thing he knows for certain. They are his family now. He silently promises himself that he will become the best husband and the best father he possibly can. He will give them the happiest life imaginable, so they never have to cry again. After the family finishes sharing their emotions, they return to the cabin. Once inside, an awkward silence fills the room. None of them know how to act after breaking down in front of one another. Eventually, Ju-won decides to break the silence by introducing himself. Since they don't understand Korean, he slowly pronounces each syllable of his name so they can repeat it. Fortunately, both Lizzie and the little girl are quick learners, and they manage to pronounce his name correctly almost immediately. After that, he points toward them, asking them to tell him their names as well. Lizzie goes first, carefully introducing herself and pronouncing her name. Ju-won compliments her beautiful name before turning to the little girl and asking her to introduce herself too. The little girl quietly lowers her head because her previous father never gave her a name. Lizzie never named her either, as life had already become far too difficult after that man died. Ju-won finds it heartbreaking that someone could grow up without even having a name, so he decides to give her one himself. After thinking through several possibilities, he eventually chooses Dorothy, inspired by one of his favorite childhood stories, The Wizard of Oz. The little girl instantly falls in love with the name and happily thanks Ju-won for giving her such a beautiful one. Seeing her smile fills him with happiness, and he silently hopes that one day she will live as happily as Dorothy did in the story he remembers. Later that evening, Ju-won stands outside the cabin, splitting logs to use as firewood for the fireplace throughout the night. A short distance away, Lizzie quietly watches him while reflecting on everything that has happened during the day. She softly whispers his name to herself. Even though it comes from a language she doesn't understand, it somehow sounds elegant to her. It makes her wonder who Ju-won truly is and where he originally came from. Ever since she was born, no man had ever treated her with kindness, not her father, and certainly not her husband. That is why Ju-won's gentle behavior is so difficult for her to understand. As Lizzie remains lost in her thoughts, Ju-won notices her standing by herself. He waves in her direction and even calls out her name. His voice pulls her back to reality, allowing her to get a proper look at him for the first time. She notices his black hair and dark eyes, reminding her of a legend she heard not long ago. According to that legend, a distant kingdom was caught in the middle of a war. As a last resort, they summoned a hero from another world. That legendary hero was also said to have black hair and black eyes. Still, she quickly dismisses the idea. There is no way a legendary hero would be living in such a rundown village, let alone serving as someone's slave. As she continues wondering about his identity, Ju-won has already walked over to her. Looking at him more closely, she realizes that his hair and eyes are actually closer to dark brown than pure black. He's probably just an ordinary man who happens to be a little taller than most people. That realization puts her heart at ease, although it also leaves her feeling strangely embarrassed. She can't even explain why her heart reacted the way it did. Ju-won finds her constantly changing expressions rather amusing, so he casually reaches over and gently pats her on the head. Lizzie melts beneath his touch, feeling a comforting warmth spread through her heart. The peaceful expression on her face makes her look even more adorable, drawing Ju-won toward her like a bee to a blooming flower. Before he even realizes what he's doing, he leans forward and softly plants a kiss on her lips. The unexpected kiss leaves Lizzie completely frozen. She never imagined that Ju-won would suddenly do something so intimate. Ju-won is just as shocked by his own actions. Overcome with embarrassment, he immediately turns around and runs away. As he walks deeper into the woods, he can't stop scolding himself. He can't believe he impulsively kissed Lizzie when they have only known each other for a single day. While trying to figure out how he is supposed to face her afterward, he suddenly realizes that he has wandered much deeper into the forest than he intended. He slowly scans the surroundings, searching for a path that leads back to the cabin. Then, without warning, he senses an overwhelming presence looming behind him. With a stiff expression, Ju-won slowly turns around and comes face to face with a terrifying wolf almost as large as he is. Fear instantly grips him. His heart begins to race as he struggles to decide whether he should run for his life or stand his ground and fight the massive beast. He firmly grips the stick lying on the ground and takes a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the battle ahead. The The wolf is just as determined to claim its prey. Without hesitation, it lunges straight at Juan, who has nothing but a wooden stick to defend himself. Juan quickly raises the stick between them, blocking the attack just in time. The wolf's sharp fangs sink into the wood, becoming lodged in the stick. Seizing the opportunity, Juan drives a powerful punch directly into the wolf's face. The blow only enrages the beast. With terrifying force, the wolf bites down so hard that the stick snaps cleanly in half. Now free once again, its deadly jaws are ready to strike. Juan realizes that staying on the defensive is no longer an option. He decides to attack first, but before his punch can connect, the wolf catches his arm in its jaws. Its razor-sharp teeth tear into his wrist, leaving behind a deep, gaping wound. Juan instinctively stumbles backward as an unbearable wave of pain shoots through his arm. It feels as though his entire arm has been set ablaze, but when he looks down at the injury, he freezes in shock. Actual flames are pouring out from his flesh. Juan stares in disbelief, wondering if the mysterious fire is some kind of magic. The incredible sight instantly fills him with confidence. Even the wolf appears intimidated, hesitating as it stares at the burning flames. The wolf tries to retreat, but Juan refuses to let it escape. He rushes forward and begins hammering the beast with his flaming fist. Blow after blow crashes into the wolf as its agonized howls echo through the forest. Yet Juan shows no mercy. He keeps striking until the creature finally collapses, falling completely silent. Only after the fight is over does Juan drop to the ground, exhausted, desperately trying to catch his breath and recover what little strength he has left. As he rests, his eyes drift toward the arm that had been engulfed in flames only moments earlier. He carefully examines it, expecting to find burns or the massive wound left by the wolf's bite. To his astonishment, there isn't a single mark anywhere on his skin. This leaves him wondering if he somehow managed to use magic without any training or guidance. The thought immediately reminds him of the fantasy novels he used to read during his free time. Curious, he begins experimenting by shouting the names of various spells. Fireball. Nothing happens. Firestorm. Still nothing. Firewall. Again, no response. Refusing to give up, he even recites a magical incantation he remembers from those novels, but that proves just as useless. Eventually, Juan lets out a defeated sigh and gives up. There has to be some hidden trick to using magic at will. Even so, he is completely certain that he possesses magical abilities. After all, the arm that should have been left with a horrifying, gaping wound has already healed without leaving even the slightest scar. Determination burns within him. Juan vows to learn how to control his magic as quickly as possible. Doing so will not only make him a stronger hunter, but also allow him to heal his family whenever they are injured, especially since there isn't a single doctor anywhere on this mountain. He clenches his fists tightly and silently promises himself that he will become stronger, better, and more capable. He wants to protect his family and give them a life far better than the one they have now. More than anything, he never wants to be called a curse again. He never wants to be seen as someone who brings death wherever he goes. Painful memories begin resurfacing. After his parents died, his grandfather was the only person willing to take him in because none of his other relatives wanted the burden of raising him. But not long after that, his grandfather also passed away. From that day onward, all of his cousins blamed Juan. They beat him mercilessly, convinced that he was an evil child cursed to bring death upon anyone who cared for him. Juan forcefully pushes those memories to the back of his mind. Now isn't the time to dwell on the past. He has more important things to do. The wolf's blood could easily attract other dangerous predators. Wasting no time, he hoists the heavy carcass onto his shoulders and begins carrying it back toward the mountain cabin, planning to butcher it and turn it into meat for his family. Back at the cabin, Lizzie and Dorothy are preparing dinner when they suddenly notice a wolf's head staring through the window. The terrifying sight instantly makes Dorothy burst into tears. Hearing her cries, Lizzie immediately grabs a knife and positions herself in front of Dorothy, ready to protect her from whatever is outside. Nervously, she peers through the window. A wave of relief washes over her. It isn't a living wolf. It's Juan carrying the dead wolf over his shoulders. However, the relief doesn't last long. The moment she notices the cuts and bruises covering his face, she rushes outside to check on him. It doesn't take long for Lizzie to realize that Juan must have gone through an incredibly dangerous battle. Otherwise, he would never have returned looking so badly injured. Juan gently tries to reassure her, explaining that there are only a few minor scratches and that everything is alright now. Although Lizzie can't understand a single word he says, she can tell from his expression and gentle tone that he's trying to tell her not to worry. Without thinking, she suddenly throws her arms around him in a tight embrace. The unexpected hug catches Juan completely by surprise. He never imagined that Lizzie would be the one to take the initiative. Dorothy quickly joins in as well, wrapping her little arms around his knees, while trying to tell him how frightened she had been. Despite neither of them being able to understand the other's language, even without words, Juan can clearly feel how worried they were. That realization fills him with guilt. He had promised himself that he would never make them cry. Yet not even a single day has passed, and he has already broken that promise. The following morning, after everyone has finally calmed down, Ju-won begins processing the wolf. He carefully skins its hide before separating the meat from the bones. When he was younger, he often watched his grandfather, who enjoyed raising animals and occasionally butchered them during special occasions. Although Ju-won remembers the basic techniques, he quickly realizes that butchering an animal is far more difficult than his grandfather ever made it seem. Still, no matter how difficult it is, he has to finish the job for the sake of his family. Just as he is about to continue working, Lizzie walks into the barn carrying a basket. She quietly hands it to him so he has somewhere to place all the freshly cut meat. Ju-won smiles gratefully and tries to thank her, but his pronunciation of the local language comes out clumsy and awkward. Seeing him struggle, Lizzie gently repeats the word and helps him pronounce it correctly. For the first time in her life, someone has sincerely thanked her. This also makes Lizzie realize that she has shared so many first-time experiences with Ju-won, whether it was hearing her first heartfelt thank you or even sharing her very first kiss. However, it also makes her wonder if she was Ju-won's first kiss as well, or if another woman had already stolen that precious moment from him. As a woman, she can't help but feel jealous of whoever might have been the one to receive Ju-won's first kiss. The thought leaves her feeling slightly down, and before she realizes it, her heart begins drifting toward thoughts she shouldn't be having. Still, Lizzie quickly snaps herself back to reality since there is still work to be done. She moves over to help Ju-won place all the meat into the bucket, but he refuses to let her handle any of the dirty work. That only leaves Lizzie even more puzzled because, in her eyes, those kinds of chores are supposed to be a woman's responsibility. Yet Ju-won carries them out so naturally, as if it has always been his job. A moment later, Ju-won slowly walks over and leans toward her face. Lizzie's heart immediately begins pounding as she wonders if he is about to kiss her lips once again. She instinctively closes her eyes in anticipation, only for Ju-won to gently place a kiss on her forehead instead. Realizing she had been expecting something much bolder makes her feel incredibly embarrassed. Ju-won her reaction and leans toward her once more. This time, however, Lizzie stubbornly keeps her eyes wide open, refusing to fall for the same trick twice. But unlike before, Ju-won never intended to tease her. Instead, he closes the distance and gently kisses her on the lips, catching Lizzie completely off guard since she never expected him to do it so suddenly. Already blushing from embarrassment, Lizzie's gaze suddenly shifts toward Dorothy as she wonders if the little girl witnessed everything. Unable to bear the embarrassment any longer, she turns around and dashes out of the barn like a Looney Tunes character. With Lizzie gone, Dorothy feels like she should help Ju-won instead. Although her tiny little hands don't accomplish much, Ju-won still sincerely thanks her for trying, making the young girl beam with happiness. Ju-won picks up the bucket filled with meat and carries it into the main cabin. As soon as he steps inside, a terrible rotting smell fills his nose. He can't understand why Lizzie is drying the animal hide inside the house. However, after watching her carefully scrape and cure the skin, he realizes that the hide must be an incredibly valuable resource to her. It makes Ju-won realize just how little he truly understands about this world's way of life. Back in his previous life, many things people considered ordinary are treated like precious treasures here. Because of that, he understands that he must not only change his way of thinking, but also learn how trading and money work in this world. Without even basic financial knowledge, he knows it will only be a matter of time before someone clever takes advantage of him. While Lizzie remains occupied with curing the meat, Ju-won decides to head back into the forest to get a little more work done. Lizzie immediately tries to stop him, worried that he might end up getting hurt again. Ju-won reassures her that this time he only plans on chopping down a few trees, so there is nothing to worry about. After entering the woods, Ju-won spots a relatively small tree and decides it will make good practice. Ideally, he would have preferred finding an oak tree, since he had heard it produces the best firewood. Unfortunately, he has no idea how to tell one type of tree from another, leaving him no choice but to work with whatever stands before him. After marking the spot where he wants to cut, Ju-won firmly grips the axe and swings it toward the tree. Unfortunately, his grip is still too weak, causing the axe to slip right out of his hands. Feeling embarrassed, he quickly looks around to make sure nobody witnessed the mistake. Several hours later, Ju-won finally returns carrying a sack packed full of chopped logs. Although he had promised Lizzie that he wouldn't get hurt again, using an axe proves much harder than he expected, and he ends up suffering several minor injuries during the process. Seeing his condition, Lizzie immediately rushes over to treat his wounds. Dorothy also wants to help just like Lizzie does, so she scoops up some water from the jar and splashes it onto Ju-won in an attempt to cool him off. Although she ends up making quite a mess, Ju-won still appreciates her good intentions and gently pats her on the head. Once Lizzie finishes treating his injuries, the three of them gather around the dinner table. Lizzie serves the wolf meat Ju-won hunted the previous day. After going so long without eating meat, the family happily enjoys the meal, especially Dorothy, who stuffs herself so much that she immediately falls into a food coma. Ju-won gently picks up the sleeping Dorothy and carries her over to the bed so she can sleep comfortably without getting cold. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, Lizzie heats a pot of water for Ju-won so he can finally wash away all the dirt, sweat, and grime covering his body. In this world, which is still in its medieval era, a wife is expected to personally clean her husband using a washcloth. Lizzie gently wipes Ju-won's body, while he clearly enjoys the feeling of being cared for by her. However, Lizzie feels incredibly embarrassed, as his well-defined muscles constantly distract her. Ju-won can't resist teasing her a little. He reaches out, takes her hand, and leans in for a kiss. That unexpected kiss soon blossoms into an intimate moment, and neither of the newlyweds can hold back their feelings any longer. The rest is history. It was the very first time Lizzie had ever slept so peacefully. Even during her childhood, every single night had been filled with trauma. Her family was extremely poor, forcing everyone to sleep together in the same room. Because of this, her parents had no privacy, which only frustrated her father even more. He would often abuse her mother right in front of Lizzie and her siblings. Every morning, they would wake up to see their mother covered in bruises, while quietly crying to herself. Night after night, Lizzie feared for her own future, wondering if she would someday suffer the same fate as her mother. Thankfully, fate had something different in store for her. She met Ju-won, a man who treated her like a queen and her daughter like a princess. Each morning, she awakens to the comforting crackle of burning logs that keep their home warm throughout the night. Every day, she hopes to open her eyes while resting in the embrace of the kind-hearted man beside her. Lizzie understands that not every married couple shares nights this gentle and loving, which is why she treasures every moment of happiness that Ju-won has given her. Later that morning, while everyone else is still asleep, Lizzie quietly climbs out of bed and begins taking care of the usual household chores. Although she hates leaving Ju-won's warm embrace, she still feels obligated to fulfill her wifely duties, believing it is the only way she can repay him for everything he has done for her and Dorothy. Despite Lizzie's traditional way of thinking, Ju-won is still a man from the modern world. Instead of letting her work alone, he also gets out of bed and helps extinguish the fire before assisting with the other simple chores around the house. While working together, he continues practicing the small amount of the local language he has managed to learn. One of the words he has picked up is oni, which instantly makes Lizzie blush with embarrassment since she is still not accustomed to receiving so much affection. Seeing her reaction only encourages Ju-won to tease her even more. As he enjoys watching her cherry red cheeks become even redder, while the couple continue flirting with one another, Dorothy finally wakes up. It isn't because their conversation disturbed her sleep, but because she spent the entire night dreaming about eating meat. She worries that if she sleeps in too long, the precious meat might somehow disappear. Thankfully, when she peeks inside the bucket and discovers that every piece is still there, she immediately breathes a sigh of relief and eagerly looks forward to breakfast. Watching the little girl become so excited over something as simple as meat fills Ju-won with even greater determination to hunt more animals in the forest. He doesn't care whether he has to face wolves, lions, or any other dangerous beast. His only wish is to make sure his family never has to go without meat again. For that reason, he decides to bring an axe with him this time, believing it to be a far more reliable weapon than the ordinary stick he had picked up from the ground before. Holding the axe firmly in his hands, Ju-won ventures deep into the forest. Before long, he senses an overwhelming presence that feels even more terrifying and suffocating than the monstrous wolf he hunted the previous day. The oppressive aura causes Ju-won to tighten his grip on the axe as he patiently waits for the creature to reveal itself. However, instead of a savage beast emerging from the shadows, a hooded man slowly steps into view. Sometime earlier, the hooded man was wandering through the forest as he normally did when he noticed a patch of blood that appeared to belong to a large beast, most likely a wolf. The sight immediately caught the old man's attention, making him wonder which group from the village had ventured into the mountains to hunt such a dangerous creature. Curious to uncover the truth, he decided to track down whoever was responsible. However, after secretly observing the mountain for several days, the only person he found was Ju-won, a man with an enormous build and powerful muscles. At first, the hooded man suspected that Ju-won might have been the one who killed the wolf, but after watching him for a while, he realized Ju-won couldn't even swing an axe properly. That only made the situation even more confusing. In the end, he decided that the best way to find out the truth was to confront Ju-won himself. When the two finally met face to face, the old man immediately spotted the wolf bite mark on Ju-won's forearm. He found it unbelievable that such a severe wound had healed so quickly. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary villager would likely die from an infection within just a few days, especially since there were no doctors living anywhere on the mountain. Yet Ju-won now stood before him completely unharmed, without the slightest trace of injury left on his body. There was only one explanation. Ju-won had to be a mage, and an exceptionally powerful one at that. The realization filled the old man with excitement after he had nearly abandoned all hope of ever getting his revenge. Now that he had discovered someone as gifted as Ju-won, he believed that if he handled things carefully, he might finally have the chance to accomplish the revenge he had dreamed of for so many years. Although the hooded man appeared to be nothing more than a frail old man now, things had been very different in his younger days. Back when he was still healthy and full of strength, he had chosen to become the mountain caretaker for a noble's territory. It was a position that carried great opportunity opportunity. If war ever broke out, he would be summoned to fight as one of the noble's soldiers. By earning enough military achievements, he could even receive official status from the noble, allowing him to rise from an ordinary commoner into one of the elite. That was how he first arrived at this mountain, beneath which lay a peaceful village blessed with abundant resources. However, the village had one serious problem. The villagers had to venture deep into the forest whenever they needed to gather firewood. The forest itself was a terrifying place, and many who entered it never managed to return alive. As the mountain caretaker, the hooded man also had to enter the dense forest to collect wood. Unfortunately, one day he wandered much farther than he should have and suffered devastating injuries, including a broken leg. Since a mountain caretaker needed every one of his limbs to perform his duties, his dream career was effectively over. Already overwhelmed with despair, he encountered something even worse. He stumbled upon a group of goblins, a race of monsters known for abducting human women and forcing them to bear their children. Somehow, the hooded man barely escaped with his life. However, because of the injuries he had sustained, he was forced into retirement and spent the next 20 years living quietly in the village. Yet throughout those 20 years, there was never a single day when he stopped hating the goblins. He waited patiently for an opportunity to take revenge against them, and that opportunity finally appeared when he crossed paths with Ju-wan. Meeting Ju-wan gave the old man hope once again. Not only did Ju-wan possess an incredibly strong physique, but he also had astonishing regenerative abilities. On top of that, the hooded man was convinced that Ju-wan was a magician. Because of this, he resolved to dedicate the rest of his life to teaching Ju-wan everything necessary to become the strongest hunter possible. As time passed, the hooded man continued watching Ju-wan from a distance. At the same time, Ju-wan kept a close eye on the old man as well, remaining cautious in case he suddenly attempted something suspicious. Then one day, the old man unexpectedly told Ju-wan that he wanted to accept him as his student and pass down everything he knew. Hearing those words left Ju-wan completely stunned, as he had no idea what the old man truly meant. The following morning, Ju-wan finished eating breakfast and prepared himself for training. This time, however, he wasn't heading into the forest alone. The hooded man would accompany him as his teacher, guiding him toward becoming a skilled professional hunter. Although Ju-wan had agreed to receive his guidance, he still didn't trust the mysterious old man. Something about him felt incredibly shady, reminding Ju-wan of his greedy manager back on Earth. Because of that, he chose to keep the old man away from his family and simply had him wait outside the house. Once Ju-wan was ready to leave, Lizzie packed him a lunch, knowing he would likely spend the entire day training. After gathering everything he needed, Ju-wan said goodbye to both Lizzie and Dorothy before setting off, while the two warmly saw him off. For most people, this kind of farewell would probably feel completely ordinary. However, Ju-wan still couldn't get used to it. He felt unbelievably fortunate to have such a loving and beautiful family waiting for him at home. That was exactly why he had to continue training and become even stronger to protect the precious life he had finally found. The hooded man had no idea what motivated Ju-wan so deeply, but he was pleased to see his enthusiasm for learning. At the same time, he deliberately kept the truth about the goblins hidden. He intended to wait until their contract had been completed. Once that agreement was in place, Ju-wan would no longer be able to back out, even if the mere mention of goblins filled him with fear. Leading the way, the hooded man guided Ju-wan deep into the forest. There, he instructed him to carefully imitate every step he took. Ju-wan paid close attention as the old man moved through the woods in an unpredictable manner, leaving behind no obvious rhythm or pattern that anyone could easily follow. Ju-wan carefully follows the old man's footsteps, wondering if this was the kind of footwork he had once read about in those Murray martial arts comics. The old man simply smiles as he watches Ju-wan clumsily imitate each movement, trying his best to master the unusual stepping pattern. Once Ju-wan learns how to leave behind a misleading trail, the hooded man continues teaching him many other survival techniques needed to live in the forest. He shows him how to distinguish different kinds of trees by feeling their bark and observing their appearance. He also teaches him how to mentally map the forest, ensuring he can always find his way out if he ever gets lost. The two continue their training until they eventually reach a cliff. There, the old man allows Ju-wan to take a brief rest so he can catch his breath and have a quick snack to restore his energy. Ju-wan is delighted to finally relax and enjoy the lunch Lizzie had lovingly prepared for him that morning. Inside the lunchbox are a fried egg and several pieces of steak, making it the perfect meal after such exhausting training. However, just as he is about to take his first bite, the old man immediately tells him to close the lunchbox. He explains that the unnatural smell of cooked food could attract nearby wild animals. The order breaks Ju-wan's heart, because he had been looking forward to eating the meal his wife packed for him. Still, rules are rules. The old man tells him to stand up once more since they still have quite a long journey ahead. Before long, they finally arrive at their destination, a small wooden hut built high on the mountain. It turns out to be the old man's home. He steps inside, returns carrying a massive bow, and hands it over to Ju-wan. Ju-wan has never seen a bow shaped like this before. Looking at how stiff it is, he wonders how anyone could possibly pull back its string. The old man quickly proves him wrong by effortlessly drawing the bow before releasing an arrow that slams slams into a nearby tree with enough force to nearly pierce straight through it. The incredible display leaves Ju-won completely stunned. He never imagined the old man possessed such tremendous strength. Without wasting any time, the old man tells Ju-won to pick up the bow and fire an arrow the same way he just did. Since Ju-won has never used such a bow before, he struggles to maintain the proper posture while aiming. The old man patiently corrects every mistake, personally adjusting his stance and posture whenever necessary. With each correction, Ju-won gradually understands another piece of proper archery technique, allowing his skills to improve step by step. Despite having no previous experience in archery, Ju-won begins to show remarkable progress in a surprisingly short amount of time. Meanwhile, as Ju-won continues training with the hooded man, Dorothy suddenly wakes from a nightmare about her painful childhood. She is terrified that Lizzie and Ju-won might abandon her one day, just like her previous mother and father did. The moment she opens her eyes, she hurriedly searches for Lizzie but cannot find her anywhere. Her fear immediately returns, making her believe they may have truly left her behind. Panicking, she rushes to check the bucket of meat, only to find that it is still there. That sight eases her anxiety slightly, but she remains worried about Lizzie's whereabouts. As she continues searching, she suddenly hears loud voices coming from outside. Carefully peeking through the window, Dorothy sees Lizzie being harassed by 3 men from the village. She immediately recognizes them. Fear grips Dorothy, as she worries the men might begin beating Lizzie as well. Although she desperately wants to help, she is simply too frightened to step in. Outside, Lizzie repeatedly explains that she has stolen nothing and that every bit of food was personally hunted by her husband. However, the 3 men refuse to believe her. Instead, they accuse her of being an evil witch who caused her previous husband's death. Now that she has married another man, they claim she is trying to get him killed as well by stealing food that belongs to others. No matter how hard Lizzie pleads, the men shove her aside before forcing their way into the house to search for evidence themselves. Inside, they discover the wolf's hide, and their eyes immediately light up since they know it could fetch a high price. They also notice the large amount of cured meat stored in the bucket, causing them to question whether that slave had truly hunted an entire wolf on his own. The men prepare to carry everything away, but Lizzie quickly blocks their path and firmly declares that she will never allow them to steal her husband's hard-earned possessions. The 3 men grow even more enraged, mocking her for remaining silent all those years when she had no husband. Yet now that she has found a new man, they ridicule her, claiming she has suddenly found the courage to stand up to them. Without the slightest bit of mercy, one of them strikes her hard, sending her crashing to the ground before ordering the other 2 to gather everything valuable from the cabin and get ready to leave. Lend hits the floor and instinctively tries to push herself back up, but her eyes immediately fall on Dorothy hiding beneath the bed. She realizes that if she stays down any longer, the men may discover Dorothy's hiding place and harm her as well. Caught between protecting herself and protecting the little girl, she desperately struggles to decide what to do. At that moment, the red-haired man asks the blonde man what would happen if the mountain keeper ever discovered what they had done to his wife. Unwilling to risk offending someone as mysterious as the mountain keeper, the blonde man decides the safest solution is to silence her forever before burning the cabin to the ground, ensuring that no one would ever uncover the truth. The other 2 men grin after hearing the plan, realizing they had worried for nothing. After all, the mountain keeper doesn't even understand their language, so there is no possible way he could learn what truly happened from his wife once they are finished with her. Hidden beneath the bed, Dorothy can only watch helplessly as the cruel men drag her mother away. The moment they disappear from sight, she crawls out of her hiding place and desperately cries out Ju-won's name, praying that he will hear her voice and return in time to save Lizzie. Meanwhile, Ju-won has just finished his training and is preparing to head home. Just as he is about to leave, the sound of someone crying echoes through the distance. His heart immediately sinks with worry, fearing that something terrible may have happened to Dorothy or Lizzie. He wastes no time and sprints toward his home as fast as he can. As he races back, he suddenly comes across the 3 men forcefully dragging Lizzie away. The sight instantly shatters his composure, and he charges at them like a wild beast. His first punch crashes into the red-haired man's face, knocking him unconscious with a single blow. Without slowing down, he turns to the fat man and drives his knee straight into the man's face, crushing his nose. The blonde man is the quickest to recover from the shock. He immediately throws a punch from Ju-won's side, hoping to catch him off guard, but Ju-won effortlessly slips past the attack, grabs hold of him, and hurls him violently onto the ground. Before the man has a chance to recover, Ju-won slams a powerful punch into his face. Only after delivering the blow does he suddenly realize that he has been fighting like a savage animal. Seeing Ju-won hesitate, the blonde man mistakes it for weakness. He quickly grabs a nearby scythe and swings it toward Ju-won while his attention is elsewhere. Fortunately, Ju-won reacts at the very last moment, catching the man's arm before the blade can reach his neck. Filled with rage, he prepares to snap the man's arm in half. Just as he is about to do it, the old man steps in and quietly reminds him that his daughter is watching everything unfold and is terrified beyond words. Those few words shake Ju-won more deeply than facing the wolf ever had. In an instant, the rage inside him disappears, replaced by overwhelming fear. He slowly turns toward Lizzie, expecting to see nothing but fear in her eyes. Only moments ago, his own eyes had been consumed by madness, but now they tremble as though he is on the verge of tears. Lizzie cannot honestly tell him that she wasn't frightened. Watching him brutally beat those men in such a feral state reminded her of her previous husband, who used to lose control in exactly the same way. For a brief moment, she couldn't help but wonder whether Ju-won might one day turn that same violence against her. But as she looks into his eyes, she no longer sees rage. Instead, she sees nothing but genuine concern for her and the family they share. That single look reassures her completely. She realizes that no matter what happens, Ju-won will always stand between them and danger, and that the fear she felt moments ago had been unfounded. With that realization, Lizzie gently takes Ju-won's hand and presses it against her cheek, wanting to feel the warmth within him. In that simple touch, she feels nothing but kindness. Returning that same warmth, she softly thanks him for protecting her and her family from the cruelty and evil of the world. Ju-won pulls Lizzie into a warm embrace, and she happily wraps her arms around him in return. As the couple enjoys their heartfelt moment together, their eyes suddenly land on Dorothy, reminding them that they had completely forgotten about their daughter. Immediately setting their romance aside, they hurry over to check on her, only to find that she is still trembling from everything that had just happened. The brutal scene had reopened the painful memories of her deadbeat father, who used to abuse both her and her mother. When Dorothy witnessed the three cruel men attacking Lizzie, she became terrified that they would hurt her as well. That fear was the reason she stayed hidden beneath the bed instead of coming out to help. Even so, Dorothy worries that Lizzie might hate her or even abandon her for not doing anything. Filled with guilt, she apologizes for hiding while Lizzie was being beaten. Hearing those words shatters Lizzie's heart, and she immediately pulls Dorothy into a tight embrace. Holding her close, she gently assures Dorothy that she did absolutely nothing wrong. Instead, Lizzie praises her for thinking quickly and hiding herself before the dangerous men could find her. Dorothy gradually calms down after hearing those comforting words, although she still seems frightened whenever she looks at Ju-won. Seeing this, Lizzie softly reassures her, telling Dorothy that there is nothing left to fear because her dad will always protect her. Dorothy tilts her head in confusion before reminding Lizzie that her father died in the mountains. So how can he protect me? Lizzie can't help but giggle at Dorothy's innocent misunderstanding. She explains that she isn't talking about Dorothy's abusive father but about Ju-won instead. Dorothy still doesn't understand how Ju-won could possibly be her father. Lizzie then explains that since she has become Dorothy's stepmother, Ju-won, as her husband, is naturally Dorothy's stepfather. The explanation instantly fills Dorothy with excitement. She can hardly believe that Ju-won is now her new father. To Dorothy, Ju-won is the greatest man in the world. He is tall, powerful, and incredibly kind. She never imagined that after losing her cruel and worthless father, she would be blessed with such a handsome and caring one instead. Without another thought, Dorothy dashes out of her room and runs straight toward him, happily calling him Daddy. Although Ju-won doesn't understand the exact words she is saying, he can tell it means something close to father. Smiling warmly, he allows Dorothy to crash into him as she hugs him tightly, refusing to let go. Ju-won's heart melts with happiness. Like any loving father would, he reaches down to pick her up. However, just before lifting her, he notices an unusual smell. It doesn't take him long to realize that Dorothy had probably wet herself out of fear during everything that happened. Even so, he has no intention of ruining such a precious moment. Without saying a word, he lifts her into his arms anyway, and lets her cling to him as long as she wants. Lizzie soon joins them, and for a brief moment, the three of them enjoy the warmth and peace of being together as a family. That peaceful moment doesn't last long, however, as Dorothy suddenly notices the robbers and the bucket of meat they had stolen. Instantly forgetting everything else, she sprints toward the bucket as fast as a cheetah. She hurriedly removes the lid to check whether all of the meat is still inside. The moment she confirms that nothing is missing, her gloomy expression disappears, and she becomes as cheerful as ever. Watching from a distance, Ju-won and Lizzie can't help laughing at Dorothy's adorable behavior. They quickly realize that her love for meat is stronger than almost anything else. Seeing how happy it makes her only strengthens Ju-won's determination. He becomes even more eager to hunt more animals so Dorothy can enjoy eating meat every single day, no matter what it takes. Before that, however, he still has unfinished business with the three robbers. Ju-won asks Lizzie to take Dorothy safely inside while he walks alone toward the unconscious men. Just as he is about to deal with them, the old hunter suddenly stops him and advises him not to kill or further injure the three robbers. Those words immediately cool the burning rage inside Ju-won. He realizes that attacking them again could easily lead to his arrest, or even worse, send him back into slavery. Grateful for the old hunter's wisdom, Ju-won thanks him for the advice. The old hunter suggests leaving the three men where they are and simply taking their tools instead. Agreeing with his suggestion, Ju-won collects the robbers' tools and carries them back home. Before leaving, he gives the unconscious men one final warning that if they ever dare cross his path again, he will make sure they suffer a fate far worse than death. Later that night, once the entire commotion had finally settled down, Ju-won takes care of Lizzie's bruises by attempting to heal them with his healing magic. Ever since his battle against the wolf, he hasn't been able to reproduce that same miracle, so he isn't very confident that his magic will work this time. To his surprise, every bruise on Lizzie's face fades away completely within just a few seconds. Delighted by his successful healing, Ju-won embraces Lizzie and carries her to the bedroom, where the couple spends the entire night enjoying each other's company. By the following morning, the village is as lively as ever as everyone busily prepares for the approaching harvest festival. While the villagers go about their work, the village chief's wife is angrily scolding her husband for giving away all the fabric she had spent the last 10 years. The village chief patiently tries to calm her by explaining that the village desperately needs a mountain guardian, and in his eyes, there is no one better suited for that role than Ju-won. Even so, his wife remains bitter because that precious fabric had taken her a full decade to gather. The village chief reassures her that it is a worthwhile investment since Ju-won is not only an excellent fighter, but also a skilled hunter. He then tells his wife that she should build a good relationship with Lizzie because if Ju-won starts hunting rabbits regularly, Lizzie might be willing to sell them rabbit pelts at a very affordable price. Hearing this, the village chief's wife finally begins to calm down and decides to place her trust in her husband's judgment. Once she leaves, however, the village chief's gentle smile slowly changes into a sly smirk because he never revealed the real reason he was so generous with the fabric. The truth is that he had noticed the wolf bite on Ju-won's arm, a wound that should have left him gravely injured. Yet Ju-won looked perfectly healthy, and the injury appeared to have healed without leaving any trace behind. The village chief knows that only healing magic is capable of restoring such a serious wound in such a short amount of time. That can only mean Ju-won is a healing mage, especially since there isn't another person capable of casting healing magic anywhere in the entire county, let alone within this small village. That realization awakens the greed hidden deep inside the village chief's heart. He begins to think that if he were to sell Ju-wan to a wealthy noble, he could finally escape this miserable village and enjoy a luxurious life in a grand city. That is also why he kept this discovery hidden even from his own wife. He feared that she might accidentally spread the information to the other villagers. At this point, only he and the old hunter, Gus, know about Ju-wan's healing abilities. Meanwhile, back on the mountain, Ju-won remains completely unaware of the schemes being plotted by both the village chief and the hunter Gus. Instead, he is far too busy admiring his adorable rabbit-like wife. Ever since the village chief visited their home and gifted them the fabric, Lizzie has been as joyful as a rabbit discovering an entire carrot field. Ju-won has no idea what she plans to make with all that fabric, so he simply lets her enjoy herself while he leaves the house to continue training with the old man, Gus. Yesterday, Gus told him that they would be hunting rabbits today, and that thought makes Ju-won feel uneasy. He simply can't bring himself to hunt such adorable creatures because they remind him too much of both his wife and his daughter. Because of that, he secretly hopes that the rabbits living in this forest are ugly enough that he won't feel guilty when it comes time to shoot them. This is where the story comes to an end for now. Ju-won still has no idea about the dangers waiting for him, not only deep within the forest, but also back in the village itself. Will he be able to survive the deadly predicament that lies ahead? To find out, keep following this channel, and don't forget to like this video to let us know that you want the next part.